With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Heard Tell Show. I'm Andrew Donaldson. Thank you so much for joining us on this Thursday, December the 23rd. That's Festivus for those of you that have some grievances that you want to air. We hope you're having a great holiday season. Christmas is coming on Saturday, but we got 2 more days of work to put in. A lot going on today. Sam Lewis is going to join us from the UK. We're going to talk China. Obviously, a topic and an issue that just continues to grow in importance. Also kind of going to foreshadow into the coming year because there is going to be so much talk about China with the Olympics, with their economic expansions, their physical expansions in other countries. We're going to have to talk about China. We talked about the Ping Shui situation on yesterday's program. A lot going on. We're going to talk to Sam Lewis, another of our Young Voices collaborators who we're thrilled to always get to work with. I'm going to talk a little holiday cheer to end the show because we have other heavy topics involved. We're also going to talk about a written article that talks about how the news media internally is probably using some of the COVID coverage and how it affects how the news media covers COVID. We're going to talk about that from a problematic source, writing problematic thoughts, but that's a good thing because it pushes our own thinking and we can add to the pile. But I want to start with something that affects basically everybody because everybody is pretty much online nowadays. Matter of fact, if you are watching this or listening on any of the various platforms that we are on, you have a social media account. You'd have to have one to be watching this, or at least borrowing one, whatever the case may be. So you probably heard tell that plenty of people want regulation of big tech. And big tech, they're usually meaning Google, Facebook, Twitter, things like this. From the Washington Post, the headline reads this: Americans widely distrust Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram with their data poll finds. Well, that sounds ominous. Well, that's a noisy headline. Let's turn down the noise and dig into this a little bit. Quoting, it's a rare thing, this is from the Washington Post, it is the rare thing that Americans of all ages and across the political spectrum largely seem to agree on. They don't trust social media services with their information, and they view targeted and other ads as annoying and invasive, according to a Washington Post Scar School poll. Many Americans use social media and most use Facebook, but 64% say the government should do more to rein in big tech companies. People are caught enthralled to platforms and devices that increasingly shape the way we communicate, shop, store information, and otherwise manage the most fundamental parts of our lives. With nearly 3 billion monthly users around the world, Facebook can seem particularly inescapable. Reading from the Washington Post, most Americans say they are skeptical that several internet giants will responsibly handle their personal information and data about their online activity. And an overwhelming majority say they think tech companies don't provide people with enough control over how their activities are tracked and used. The survey was conducted in November among a random sample of 1,122 adults nationwide. And there's a data sheet here, and you can dig through the information at the Washington Post. Back to reading. According to the survey, 72% of internet users trust Facebook, quote, not much or, quote, not at all to responsibly handle their personal information and data on their internet activity. About 6 in 10 distrust TikTok and Instagram, while slight majorities distrust WhatsApp and YouTube. Google, Apple, Microsoft receive mixed marks for trust, while Amazon is slightly positive with 53% trust in the company. And then there's a disclaimer here because the Washington Post I'm reading from is owned by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. Continuing, only 10% say Facebook has a positive impact on society, while 56% say it has a negative impact, and 33% say its impact is neither positive nor negative. Even among those who use Facebook daily, more than 3 times as many say the social network has a negative rather than a positive impact. A lot to unpack there, whole lot of noise. Let's turn it down. Let's start with the numbers. Vin Scully once famously quipped about how stats can be helpful or they can be like a light For a drunk, you think you're getting light, but really you just want something to lean on. Only 10% say Facebook has a positive impact, according to this survey. Well, here's my problem with that. 90% of people saying that it's bad for them. Words don't mean as much as actions do. And their actions say that that is not true. Here's a stat for you. 100% of the people on Facebook or on TikTok or on Instagram or on any other social media clicked the user consent. You know, that little box that nobody pays attention to, and you just scroll through it and you just pretend like you read it. Nobody actually reads it. But those terms of conditions of use, 100% of the people that are on those social media platforms click that. There used to be this thing called personal responsibility. You don't have to be on Facebook. Now, I know some people are going to complain and argue that they are the new town square and everybody. No, these are still private companies. And when you start getting the government into thought regulation and speech maintenance inside of private companies and online, you are asking for an entire big world of trouble. You have free speech. That's a right that the government has to protect and uphold, but you already consented to play by the rules of Facebook and those other platforms. I'm sorry, I'm just not willing to give up a free and open internet to massive government regulation because people get butt hurt because of their opinions aren't getting the way they want them to go. That's not how this needs to work. Let's be blunt about something right now. Facebook, since we're using Facebook as an example, is spending millions and millions of dollars to try to get the government to regulate them. Let me say that again to you. They want the government to regulate them. They are lobbying for it. They are running advertising campaigns for it. They are begging for Section 230 restrictions to be changed. Why are they doing this? Why are they spending money? Again, actions, not words. Why are they spending so much money on it? Because they're big enough, they're bad enough, they're rich enough. They can adapt to the regulation. Whatever regulation comes down the pike, this is their way of thinking, is going to be something they can adapt to. And other companies, the next thing coming along, that's the next Facebook, will have to adapt to it. And they won't have the advantage Facebook does. Facebook wants the regulation because they think it'll make Facebook a monopoly for the next generation in social media. That's the real game going on here. So before you just start going off half-cocked complaining about Facebook and talking about they don't protect your data and they don't protect your free speech, you agreed to that. You clicked on it. You don't have to play on that playground. You agreed to those terms ahead of time. Now, there's some things that if they get untoward or get into illegal, we're not going to get into torts and contract law here. Okay. Those are binding legal agreements when you click on it. But other than that, for the normal person, you need to be very careful about demanding the government come in and fix something just because you didn't get as much likes and clicks and shares on your social media post as you think you should. Complaining about censorship because Facebook is moving stuff and has uneven rulemaking, that's bad. They shouldn't do that. But this ain't China like we've been talking about. They're not shutting you down. You agreed to this. Personal responsibility. What part is that going to play? If you start demanding the government fix everything just because of how you feel about something, you are opening the door to the government being in control of everything you feel something about. That's not good for anybody. Let's go back to that actions, not words things again. People are complaining about how they don't like social media, but their actions say that they like it just fine. Is it good policy? Is it good politics? Is it going to be good regulation to base something as important as how we communicate, the free and fair open internet? The greatest tool for freedom the human race has seen in generations in that free and fair and open internet, because people everywhere from almost anywhere now have access to all knowledge at a click of a button or on a voice cue. Do you understand what a gift that is? And we want to throw that away because we got upset over a social media post, and we're going to cede that freedom to a government that doesn't even understand the internet, let alone understand social media, let alone cares about protecting freedoms better and past what they can regulate. We need to really stop and think about this a little bit. Actions and not words. People want Facebook. They like Facebook a lot more than the government. Or they won't like what happens if they get the government to collude with Facebook so that they're the only game in town. because then you're really not going to have any restrictions on them. It's bad policy. More Herd Tell right after this. Welcome back to Herd Tell Radio. I'm Andrew Donaldson. I want to talk about a piece that is written by a problematic author saying problematic things about a problematic topic. I want to preface this because some people have a problem with this writer personally because of something he did. His name's 23Dec21. He did a very bad thing very publicly that hurt somebody. He has been very open about how he shouldn't have done that. He's apologized. He has talked about the background on why he did that without excusing it, that there was some mental health issues involved and things like that. But anyway, he was basically exiled from the writing community, and now he has his own Substack. Freddie, just so we have all the filters up front, he's very progressive to the left, borderline socialist revolutionary type stuff, but he's very clear thinking, and I appreciate his insight, even though I disagree with him on a lot of things, and he's a very talented writer. He has written a piece that I have kept thinking about since I read it the first time, and he touches on some things about how COVID is being covered, and he's covering it from a position of the folks that habitate the higher levels of our news media. They are a certain group of people that have a lot of sameness. They have a lot of sameness of thought. They have a lot of sameness in background, how they achieve those positions of power and trust in our society. And what I'm going to read the excerpt from this, and this is on Freddie's Substack. This is part of the free part. You can subscribe and read this. I share his concerns because just bringing this up gets people's priors going, and it gets people upset. And you have to understand, for the context here, this is about halfway through the piece. He starts out talking about how horrible COVID is, the death toll, how he's very much pro-vaccine, all those sorts of things. And then he gets into the meat of what he wants to discuss, and I think it's important for how we converse about COVID, and I think this is a perspective people need to chew on a little bit. Reading from 23Dec21. The vast majority of people are going to survive this pandemic, and the remarkable efficiency of Pfizer's upcoming antiviral will fundamentally change treatment, dramatically lower deaths. I write all this knowing that what I am saying is responsible and buttressed by evidence. Remember, this is about halfway through his piece. But the environment our media has created is so wildly sensationalistic and addicted to doomsaying that I get anxious just writing this. I'm afraid I'll be called an anti-vaxxer for asserting the power of vaccines. Why do they, meaning the news media, want it to be worse? I keep chewing on what function this disaster porn performs. It's hard to say that it has any bearing on public health. Does anyone think that the problem with the vaccine hesitant is that they just haven't been told loudly enough that COVID is bad? No. I do think this is worrying is a performance, but I don't think the unvaccinated are the audience. I think the audience is for as much as these people do, their peers, other people in the broad world of the educated, the liberal, the upwardly mobile, if not affluent, the very online. These people compete against each other relentlessly, habitually, ritualistically. I have made this basic observation on several different contexts before. Our striving class is made up of people who are raised to compete and who structure their emotional lives around competing with each other. They go through the groundhouse of K through 12 competition, running themselves ragged for scarce seats in the kind of colleges they feel they simply must attend. When they get there, they grind out the best grades they can get and busily occupy themselves with clubs and activities that will help them assemble the best resume for jobs or grad school. They might get a master's degree, or they may do Teach for America or Peace Corps, but sooner or later they enter the professional field in fields of life where education, attitude, and vocabulary are hugely important. Sectors of the workforce where your ability to convey that you are a certain kind of person, and Freddie's putting that in all caps, is an important or more important than the quality of your professional output. And I find that often when they get to a certain station in life, they have a kind of spiritual crisis because they now lack the structure and purpose of constant, explicit competition provided. Academics, journalists, writers, researchers, nonprofit bureaucrats, consultants of all kinds, PR reps, marketing people, professions that are filled with people who find as they ease into middle adulthood that they are materially comfortable, but miss the simpler existence of trying to climb the ladder. So they compete in less explicit areas. When this major international crisis arose, they felt a lot of legitimate fears and worries, which just makes them human. But when it became clear that the public health response to COVID involved denying ourselves things we wanted and enjoyed, including non negotiably important things like in person schooling and face to face human contact, they subconsciously saw an opening. If denial of human pleasures is virtuous, I can be more virtuous than my peers. If caution is noble, over caution must be even nobler. Reading from Freddie DeBoer. Elizabeth Currid Halleck's book, The Sum of Small Things, lays out the essential psychology brilliantly. As she demonstrates, changing norms among bougie liberals has made conspicuous consumption crass, de la classe. I'm probably saying that wrong. I'm a hillbilly. I apologize. Moving on. But the urge to compete, to win, trumps all. So our striving caste has developed all manners of other signals through which they subtly assert their superior virtue, their superior lives. COVID now fills much that role. With COVID, you never need an excuse to assert your superior seriousness. Never need to wait for the right moment to insist that you're doing it better than all your peers. You can just openly tell the world, I'm more responsible than you. And the circumstances seem to justify it, even if the behavior is not justified by the science. That's reading from Freddie DeBoer's Substack. Again, a problematic author. You can factor that into how you take this information. But I think he has a very valid point. We forget the people that make our news media are people, and they have backgrounds, and they have environments, and they have an ecosystem that they live in. And I think he has a very good point here that sometimes in the commentariat class, people want to just out commentary each other. They want to out care each other. They want to out concern each other. And it affects the news media. Why do we have screaming headlines nonstop? Because that headline has to scream louder than the other headline. Why do we have to furrow our brows more than the next person with furrowed brows? To show how much we care. These are human natures. Human nature is undefeated, but we should factor that into how we consume our news media. When we talk about turning down the noise of the news cycle, part of what we're turning down is just people turning themselves up from 11 when the 6 would do. More Heard Tell Show right after this. Back to Heard Tell Radio. I'm Andrew Donaldson. Thank you so much for staying with us. Let's go back overseas. Our friend Sam Lewis. He's a young Voices contributor, a commentator. You can catch him on places like GB News and other outlets. He also runs his own blog. Kind of a specialist on Asia, has actually lived over there and traveled. Sir, how are you? Appreciate your time today.
I'm very well, Andrew. Thanks so much for having me on.
We're thrilled to have you on short notice too, so I appreciate you very much. Lots of China in the news right now, but let's take a step back and make sure everybody's nomenclature on what we're talking about with China is correct. We have the Chinese Communist Party. We have China, the massive country, the largest country in the world population-wise. We have the Chinese economy, and then we have the global politics of all this. It makes kind of a hot mess when you go to talk and advocate and discuss issues relating to China, that those are all factors when we just say China, doesn't it?
Oh, 100%. I think the thing about China is it's been around for many thousands of years, has a wonderful history, wonderful culture. The people are very friendly. And if you go there, you'll be welcome. They welcome you like a family. You know, I remember I spent a good few years there and I loved my time there. So many friends from it. And yet, you know, it gets a lot of stick in the media. And most of that is because of the people that run it. The people that run it, the Communist Party, that simply don't want to play along with international rules, that want to change the international order and want to effectively do bad things to the world. And ultimately, we need to find a way to separate that, because a lot of people don't. And when you don't separate things, we don't understand the nuance. When you don't understand that there are, you know, different parts of China, that there are different opinions within China, they're just not expressed all the time. If you treat them as one big blob, then well, we're not going to get anywhere in international relations, and we're not going to improve relations anytime in the next few years.
This is particularly touchy. I know I try to be cognizant of it. I mess up too. When I'm doing my advocacy, especially when I'm being critical of the ruling powers in China, to make sure I delineate that from the Chinese people, because the Chinese Communist Party and leaders, Xi Jinping, these folks, that's a major thing for them. They purposely want to make sure those two things, there's no separation and they are one and the same. So it's even more incumbent on us in Western media, or those of us that have freedom of speech and have platforms. It's really important that we do that, isn't it? Because this gets to the very heart of what their plans and policies for some of the more untoward stuff they're doing, isn't it?
Well, yeah, the thing is that they try to claim Chinese people around the world. If you live in Singapore or if you live in America and you're Chinese, if you were born in these places that are nowhere near China, they seem to think that you should think the same way that the Chinese Communist Party does. And it's obviously absolutely wrong. Everyone has their own opinion. You can be Chinese and think for yourself. You don't have to think what the Communist Party says. And we just need to be clear that that's the case. And we can't mix them up as much, because there are lots of people out there, especially from Hong Kong and from within China, who do think like we do in the West and ultimately want to be part of the debate, just they're stopped from being part of the debate within China.
You've actually been there. How would you explain the scale of China to them, population wise, landmass wise? This is a huge part of our globe. You're talking about, a billion people. Their economic might comes from having a 750 million strong workforce. Just nobody else has anything close to that. You've actually been on the ground there. How would you explain scale? Because I think sometimes, especially in Western media, we're talking about them like they're just another country, but just by the math, they're really not.
Oh, 100%. I mean, if you look at how China is composed, it's effectively got 32 provinces, 4 of which are huge cities. And these places are, they have hundreds of cities. In the UK, we might have a couple of cities. I think we have 4 cities which are above 1 million people. Over there, it's hundreds of cities that have over 1 million people. And the fact is that because it's such a large country of 1.4 billion, there's a lot of different dialects. There's a lot of different food, cuisine. The local Chinese down where I am and the local Chinese where you are will have a certain form of food, but it's not real Chinese food. Ultimately, you have food from South China, which is a bit spicier. You have food from the north of China, which is more noodles, less rice, which grows in the south. North east, you have a bit of food which is like Korean food. So there's a lot of different stuff going on. And in fact, a lot of people within Zhejiang, for example, one of the provinces in the center of the country, they wouldn't be able to understand someone from Guangzhou in the south because they speak different dialects. Shanghainese is different to Cantonese. And ultimately, that's how Mandarin has come about as a language. This is the language that it's a northern language, but they're taught to all speak it in schools. It's the common language that they all use. So there's a lot of variation, there's a lot of difference, and it all sort of comes together. And there's so many different dynamics going on, and not all people within China are the same.
There's going to be a lot of attention, not just the politics and the diplomatic and the international stuff, but China is once again getting the Olympics. The pressure on that is twofold. One is the world is paying more attention to China besides just the political and policy wonks like us who do it all the time, but also because China, and we just saw this in recent history, they use this as an advertisement. They use this, I'll go ahead and use the word, they use this as propaganda. So this pressure on China and making sure we understand China is going to be even more important going into this next year.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is that this is a soft power victory for them. So America has taken a bold step, as has the UK and some other countries like Lithuania, of not sending diplomats. I think we should have gone further and not sent athletes. But, we are where we are. The fact is that China is going to use this as in the same way that Germany did in 1936. This is a way for them to prove that they're part of the world and prove that, they're on top. They'll probably win a ton of medals, and they'll use this as nationalistic propaganda locally. And they want to say, oh, look, we're all welcoming, we're all open, come and visit, when that's just not the case. And they've, spent these last few years bullying smaller nations that disagree with them. And they've also been skimming off countries that have been trying to integrate with the West, and they've been making countries recognize them over Taiwan. And they've been promoting anti-democratic forces locally. Well, two countries on their border have now got governments that are anti-democratic. You have Burma, who had a military coup in the last year, and of course you have Afghanistan, where the Taliban came to power. And China has been slowly but surely sort of allowing the international system to change for the worse, and we've been doing nothing to counter them. And the IOC has decided, even after Peng Shuai came out and said that she'd been sexually assaulted by a senior member of the Communist Party, and the IOC still thought, even though tennis is part of the Olympics, not part of the Winter Olympics, but part of the Olympics, which the IOC runs both of them, obviously, the IOC hasn't pulled out of China, and it's going ahead, and they're just ignoring it. And whenever they're asked questions about it, they just ignore it and think, oh, no, it doesn't matter. Of course it matters. And if this was a Western country, they'd probably be raising hell about it. But because it's China, they haven't been, and they've been staying silent. And we can't stay silent on these issues anymore. We have to do something. And at least, there's going to be a diplomatic boycott from nations that are leading the way, like America and the UK, but there needs to be more done.
More with Sam Lewis on Hertel right after this. Hertel Radio, thanks for sticking with us. I'm Andrew Donaldson, being joined by Sam Lewis, a Young Voices contributor and expert on Asia. What is the effect practically of the diplomatic boycott by, let's just start with the U.S. because they're kind of the big name so far to do this. I was one of those. I don't think it goes far enough. I know Beijing and the ruling powers freaked out about it because they hate the optics of it and they push back strong against absolutely everything. They're very petty in matters like this, but practically, is this really doing anything other than just kind of aggravating the Chinese?
Not really. That's the problem. All it seems to be doing is giving, fire to the flame of wolf warrior diplomacy, which has just taken off in the last 2 years. This they can sell to the public as, oh, we're being bullied by the West again. They're not coming along, even though they're sending their athletes. It's not that bad because they're still sending their athletes, but they just want to make a show, and they want to do this, which isn't being that productive. And they will sell this to the public as, but we're going to go ahead with it anyway. We're standing up to the West, and it doesn't matter what happens. So, I mean, what more can we do? I don't think we should have sent our athletes. Like I say, sport is a big soft power. And people think you should separate sport and politics, but not when the Chinese Communist Party don't do the same. We need to play them at their own game. We need to understand that they're using sport as a means to promote themselves, and we therefore need to use sport as a means to, promote our values and stop. If we all came together, if the EU came together, EU nations, America came together, who else we could persuade within South America, within Asia, not to go along, China would be left with a tournament of 20 nations coming together for a little, what would effectively be a regional tournament. Russia can't be there anyway because they're not allowed as part of the IOC sanctions that they had. And so, we should have gone further. But in terms of what this particular diplomatic boycott will do practically, very little, unfortunately, I think.
Sam Lewis joined us on Hertel. I bear down on that terminology, though, because it's not just sports. This wolf warrior diplomacy, it's in their diplomats, it's in their mouthpieces, we all see on our social media the state sponsored tag that's all over everything. If you say anything about China now, this is a total full court press on basically all speech everywhere all the time. So why do you call it that wolf warrior diplomacy? Because it really permeates almost everything they're doing right now.
Yeah, so this sort of started a few years ago. I mean, the one diplomat that really comes to mind is a guy called Zhao Lijian, who works at the foreign office within China. Now, a few years ago, he was at an embassy. I forget where. I think it was somewhere in South America. But he was effectively, he wrote on Twitter something which an ambassador shouldn't, or someone within the embassy shouldn't. It wasn't very diplomatic, and he was told off for it. And yet he sort of went home, and a year later he reappeared within their foreign office, and it's just sort of taken off after that. And I think behind the scenes, the Chinese have sort of said, you know what, we don't really care what people think about us anymore. We just got to show ourselves to be strong and powerful, and it's about having a strong presence and having a strong ability to sort of scare other nations. So there's a big factor within China, both within society and within politics, of saving face. It's about effectively, it's all about pride. It's about showing yourself to be strong, and you won't collapse under scrutiny from anybody else. And yet they haven't found the subtle difference between being confident in yourself and just coming across as very arrogant. And I think a lot of it's become lost in translation, and they've simply, this is daytime radio, so I won't say the word that's on my mind, but they're not being very subtle about it, and they're acting very in a not very diplomatic way. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, we're talking to Sam Lewis. We're talking China, some international issues with them, the Olympics, Peng Shui, some other things. We'll be right back with him on Herd Tell Radio right after this. Herd Tell Radio, thanks for sticking with us. I'm Andrew Donaldson, being joined by Sam Lewis, a Young Voices contributor and expert on Asia. Talking China, we're talking about all the untoward stuff here. The thing that has kind of broke through some of the media coverage lately, and because sports and Olympics is on the mind, is the Peng Shui thing. She disappeared after a allegation of sexual assault against the former vice premier, Zhang, I believe his name's pronounced. She disappears for 3 months. Now she's reappeared with a lot of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, because she just happened to be at a state-sponsored event with a state-sponsored media person asking her questions with lots of Chinese celebrities that are supportive of the regime surrounding her. I have been saying we have been watching somebody be re-educated right in front of our very eyes. Is that too harsh, or does that sound about right to you?
No, but I think you've hit the nail on the head there. She's basically been, she posted on Weibo, which is their equivalent of Facebook, this long sort of blog, basically explaining this sexual assault that happened to her. And within a few minutes, it was taken down, not before screenshots were taken, of course, but an account was suspended, and she suddenly disappeared for a month or two. And there's precedent to this. Jack Ma, 2 years ago, started to talk up about how Chinese regulators were actually, ruining his business plans, and that they had to change the way they were doing things. And, freedom of expression is not a thing within China. That's a big no-no. You can't do that unless you're attacking a foreign nation, in which case, be free as you like to say what you want. Or if you're attacking Tesla, be free as you like to say what you want. That can go viral. But if you're attacking anything to do with the Chinese Communist Party, that is not allowed. And in Jack Ma's case, he disappeared for a couple of months and then had to do sort of, I think the Chinese equivalent of community service. He had to take a couple of educational lessons, take a couple of, make a few videos explaining, why China's the best place to do business, etc. And you see this with a lot of other sort of rich, famous people. China has come down more recently on the worst inequalities of the regime, of which there are many, and they've sort of gone after rich people that don't necessarily pay as much tax as they should. And this is called a common prosperity drive, and some elements of it are very good. I think, yeah, there's a lot of grotesque inequality within China, and they're trying to tackle it, but some of it is just to shut up people that have an opinion for themselves. And in this particular case, they've sort of thrown Peng Shui in the same end. They've silenced her, and then they tried to row back and say no, she's free to talk. But obviously, she's always got a camera on her, and they know what she's saying, so she can't be truly open. And effectively now we've got to a stage where I think they've realized, we have to let her be free to talk to an extent, because what we tried to do didn't work, and the West has seen through it. And now she's effectively, I reckon she was forced to do it, but she's withdrawn her statement that she made about sexual assault. And it's such a shame, because this could be a Chinese Me Too movement. Women are not treated equally in China. Men dominate the political landscape, and it's such a shame that this wasn't really taken to help women's rights within China.
What is it? Because you've been talking about it in your writing and your advocacy, and I have as well. The last couple of years, China has really cranked up domestically, internally, the nationalism. Xi Jinping, of course, with his book out now, and the silliness over the Amazon rating, everybody's kind of laughing about that, but it's part of a pattern. They've really been cranking up on that. They are obsessed over Chinese culture being all about, the one China. And I don't mean the Taiwan policy. I mean one China as in the party and the people are one. What is it culturally going on in China? Like you said, this is, a missed opportunity for inequalities in China. What culturally has been going on the last couple of years for this? I'll just call it a crackdown, for lack of a better term, where they're getting very obsessive over the nationalistic components to the Chinese Communist Party all of a sudden. What's changed? Is that a cultural change, or did something else happen, or what's driving that?
Well, as you said, I mean, domestically, they've been pursuing this nationalistic rhetoric that's just not been seen since Mao, not been seen since the 50s and 60s. And I think that has something to do with Xi Jinping's ego. I mean, he is now at the end of his second term. He'll most likely be voted in within the internal party voting that goes on. It's very much not a democratic country, but he'll be voted in again for a third term. And it's all about cementing a legacy. The best emperors throughout Chinese history have expanded and consolidated China's territorial gain. And he's pushed this idea of China's national rejuvenation. They're overcoming the century of humiliation, which started with the first Opium War, where China lost Hong Kong to the British, and also Vladivostok to the Russians. Let's not forget that. That's also, people say that Russia and China are best buddies and that there'll never be an issue there. But don't forget, Hong Kong and Vladivostok were lost around the same time. And there are still people within China that want Vladivostok back. Let's not forget that. But this nationalistic rhetoric has just been really upped. It's got to very vile. And I think it's happened after the coronavirus. There must have been a spike in it simply because, well, firstly, they closed off. So they stopped having as many foreigners coming in. They weren't as open. And they also, once the virus sort of was more abroad than at home, they saw an opportunity to change the narrative, to change the propaganda, to say, actually, this is a foreign disease. This has nothing to do with us. And that's why they came up with the lie of saying that the American military brought it to China. And believe it or not, a lot of people within China believe that lie. And it's disgusting that it's got to that stage. And more recently, I was sent a video, for example, of a kindergarten where I know a friend who works there. And, there were 3, 4, 5-year-olds in front of a screen of, tanks and Chinese military, and they were screaming this nationalistic tune out, and they were waving Chinese flags at the same time. It was very North Korean, but in this case, China has nuclear weapons, and they're teaching their kids that, Taiwan is an integral part and that it's of China, and then it's okay that they invade it. It's as if, and that rejuvenation won't take place until Taiwan comes back into the Chinese family, as if and it doesn't matter what Taiwanese people think; they just want to bring it about. So it's a means of control. There's nothing that really gets people together than a sense of patriotism. At least I think that's what the Chinese Communist Party are betting on, and it's based on this idea that they've been unfairly treated in history, but I just see parallels here between Germany in the 1930s and them being unfairly treated at the Treaty of Versailles. And obviously we know how that ended. And I can only hope that this doesn't end the same way. But the way that China's acting over the South China Sea, the way they're acting over Taiwan, and the way they're still referring to Japan as the enemy, as if Japan is still the same World War II power that brought destruction to China. It's, if China continue on this way in the next few years, we're not going to see an improvement in relations.
This brings us back to kind of where we started on the international stage, though, just to round out this long conversation we're having, and we're with Sam Lewis. Appreciate his time. There's a gap here because their mouthpieces and their media supporters will say that they are not expanding, they are not imperialistic, they're not interested in all that. But as you just laid out, their actions tell us something very different. And this is really at the core of the international problem that we have, where they're not going to change. The international community doesn't have a lot of method to make them change, but conflict is inevitable. So to ask the impossible question, so now what?
Well, I think, as much as what I just said was quite scary, we shouldn't be too worried. The fall of the USSR in the 1990s and the sudden increase in democracies that ultimately resulted was a high point. But, there's a gentleman called Francis Fukuyama. I'm not sure if you heard of his end of history thesis, but the idea is that, the geopolitics is done, that there'll be no more real international conflict on a big scale because, all the nations will come together. And I think that sort of shows a hubris that existed in the Clinton years and the early Bush years, the idea that, peace is normal. And, that's just not the case. Peace is the exception. War is unfortunately the norm throughout history. And, borders change. Sometimes, nations are on a spectrum of democracy. So we shouldn't be too worried. But we should just forget the idea that China is going to be like us as a liberal democracy, which, don't forget, until 2018, until Trump launched the tariff war, we sort of thought China would go the same way as us. And we blinded ourselves in this ignorance of ours. But, there are two ways we can really look to combat China internationally, and to make sure that a lot of the world follows our lead or the West's lead and America's lead rather than China's lead. And that comes down to money and vaccinations. So China have their Belt and Road Initiative, and they use it to influence other nations. And very often, especially within Africa and South America, it's a case of accept Chinese money or don't grow at all, don't develop. And of course, if we were in their position, we'd probably say, well, you know what, we're going to go for the money. So we're going to go for, whatever China's stipulations are, and we're going to try and cozy up to China. But this is where the planned, Joe Biden's plan for Build Back Better World, which was announced at the G7 and what the G7 nations come up with, is quite a good idea. It's about offering transparent loans and offering an alternative to Chinese Belt and Road money. So this is something that could be explored within the following years. But more pressingly, is ultimately using our soft power, using vaccines. When Nicaragua very recently changed their recognizing Taiwan to recognizing China, it just so happened a week later they got 200,000 Sinovac COVID-19 vaccines. So China's using vaccines as soft power diplomacy to get the world to do what they want. And we should do the same. Our vaccines are way better. Pfizer and Moderna are way better than Sinovac. But because a lot of these poorer countries have no alternative, they weren't able to get the contracts with the better firms to begin with, they go to China. So we have the better vaccines. We have the better transparent, loans. We should use it, and we should try and, get into these countries and show that we're still there, that we still want to be their friend and be their ally. And I think the Donald Trump years, or whatever you thought of him, didn't necessarily do much for the allies around the world. A lot of people lost faith in America, and that has to sort of be brought back slowly. And I think that, those are two particular ways. So money, vaccines.
One last quick question before we let you go, Sam Lewis. You mentioned the Soviet Union, the fall of it. We know that was a two-pronged fall. It was economic, but the part that doesn't get discussed a lot was cultural, the changing technology. We were able to get cultural differences in there. Is there any chance? We know the economic might of China is not going anywhere, and probably for at least the next generation. Is there any chance of culture breaking through the Great Red Firewall?
Well, look, if you go to China, they have McDonald's everywhere. They have H&M everywhere. They love NBA. They love American culture. They love Western culture. They absolutely adore it. And the fact is that in recent years, that sort of started to change. But younger people in China still love it. But slowly by slowly, as part of the nationalistic campaigns run by the Chinese Communist Party, they're going for Chinese brands over Western ones now. So, I mean, especially with culture, it's quite tough for governments to intervene. This is something that just sort of happens by osmosis if it's allowed. So, unfortunately, I don't think there is a way around the Chinese firewall. China has ultimately been able to block off, for example, there's only a certain number of Western films that are allowed into the Chinese cinema market. And they have to be pre-approved. And that's why you see, for example, Mission Impossible succumbing to Chinese demands and getting rid of the Taiwanese flag on Tom Cruise's back. And that's the unfortunate thing. But, we'd have to be confident in the West. We have to be confident in ourselves, and not be sorry and not censor everything just because we want to get into the Chinese market. And it has to start at home. It has to start with our businesses saying, well, you know what, we don't need China, as South Park did a couple of years ago. And Chinese people still love South Park, and because it's banned, they find VPNs and they watch it instead. But the NBA needs to grow a spine. Other companies like Apple and Tesla need to grow a spine, and focus on the Western market, and ultimately then it will go through into the Chinese market.
Yeah. Wish we had another hour. We could still dig into it because you know what you're talking about. And that's what we like to do here. We like to turn down the noise and get to the information. And you, my friend, give good information. So, Sam Lewis, let folks know where they can follow you and what you've got working on, both Young Voices and other mediums, so folks can find you.
Yep. So if you want to on Twitter, I'm my hashtag is my handle is at East Asia Insider. That's also the name of my blog. So if you type in on Google East Asia Insider, you can find a website with my image on it and a couple of the articles I write and all the media appearances I do. I've got a couple of books in the work, both a novel, but both are set in China. The first one should be coming out in January or February. So that's called Eyes to the East. If any of you see it in bookstores near you, please let me know and I can get you a signed copy. But it's there's a few things in the works, and China is becoming ever increasingly important in all our lives. So I hope to be focusing on it for a few years to come.
Yeah, and we will definitely want to have you back on to talk about it more, especially in the coming year with the Olympics and other things. We're not going to have a reft of things to not talk about on China. He's going to be first and foremost. So, Sam Lewis, thank you so much for the time today, my friend. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, sir. It's Heard Tell. I'm Andrew Donaldson. Let's have a happy note to end this session today. Washington Post, a man strung Christmas lights from his home to his neighbors to support her. The whole community followed. And you can read the whole story. It's a story in Baltimore. And what happened was they ran a string of lights from his house. They have a photo across his yard, up a tree, across the street, down a tree, and across her yard and into her house. And they ran a single strand of lights. The nice thing about this was people noticed. And before too long, every house in the neighborhood had a string of lights between it. And then before too much longer, every other house had another string of lights between those houses. And now in the Washington Post, you can see the photos yourself. The entire neighborhood is completely covered in lights. There's little things we can do during the holiday seasons for folks, like shed a little light. It's not just a song, you can actually do it. And even if you don't literally string lights and bring a little light, you can do something nice for somebody. Use your social media for something other than sending cat pictures and complaining about Washington, D.C., and check on folks and talk to them and see how they're doing. And let them know somebody cares. Sometimes just asking and letting somebody know that you want to know if they're okay can be as good a gift as anything else. That'll do it for Heard Tell for today. Thank you so much for listening. However you're listening, we sure appreciate it. We hope you and yours are having a good holiday season, and we'll talk to you with more Heard Tell tomorrow to round out the pre-Christmas version before Christmas on Saturday. Wherever you and yours are, we hope you're well. We hope you're well fed. We'll talk to you next time on Heard Tell. All the music on Heard Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.
Somos la máquina.